You should start with whatever entry you feel like.
Seriously, is that the best you can do for your audience? For fuck's sake, Glint.
I mean, that is kind of legitimate advice though. I guess I could elaborate a bit more.
As you should. Now go write a proper script, and do it fast.
You are so fucking annoying. Welcome, Ravens. There are roughly around 15 entries in the franchise. Some are a bit experimental. Some serve as platforms for a generational leap, and some are just straight up ass. Like, really ass. Anyway, having so many different games to choose from, most of them released on ancient console hardware, makes for a hell of an enormous barrier of entry to the series. So I thought I could help ease in any newcomer ravens into the bleak, depressing, and gloriously addicting world of Armored Core, by introducing you to what I consider are the best jumpstart games for your career as a mercenary. I won't be going into why all of the other titles don't make it into this list, regardless of their actual quality or importance. What I'm going to do is walk you through the reasons why my selected entry points work well for beginners, and what they have to offer. First up, the OG, Armored Core from 1997.
Isn't that a bit too old? Are you trying to scare people away, or bring them in?
Don't listen to this crazy bitch. The original Armored Core is where it all started. It laid the foundation for more than half of the games to come and was truly ahead of its time. This is a PS1 title, and as such it has to be interpreted and appreciated as a product of circumstance, which is what I would usually say for most older games in general, but this one is an outlier. Forget everything you know about modern game control schemes, in-depth tutorials and unspoken conventions. Armored Core is absolutely a brutalist fever dream. Everything is industrialized, bleak, despondent and utilitarian, from the menus to the environments and even the actual gameplay. This sets the tone for most of what you will come to expect from the series moving forward. It always circles back into how your work as a mercenary, a raven, consists of being a wage slave for big corporations that will hire you to commit morally questionable acts, in pursuit of totalitarian control over the populace. Does that sound enticing? No? Well, you can use your blood money to deck out your own tailor-made war machine. How about that? One of the standout features of this game is how difficulty, customization and build variety are all tied to monetary resource management. The better and more efficiently you do your job, the more you'll get paid, in turn allowing you more freedom of choice when it comes to engaging with the garage portion of the gameplay loop. While this is effectively carried over through the various generations of AC games, this implementation remains perhaps one of the most interesting and unique. See, not only do you not have access to a way of farming credits outside of missions using the arena, a feature that would come into play one entry down the line, but you also will reach game over if you incur enough debt. This adds a significant amount of tension every time you're deployed into an assignment and helps sell the fantasy of being a broke pilot, living paycheck to paycheck trying to make it by. In addition, there's the Human Plus project, something that I won't spoil but is very subtly explored in the narrative through subtext. It ties into the whole debt system, acting as a difficulty slider, plot point and mechanic, all at the same time. The game has upwards of 40 missions, all of them boasting surprisingly varied enemy types, deceptively big environments with lots of interesting hidden parts to hunt for, and sufficiently interesting objectives to clear through. Some of these missions will throw insane curveballs at you when it comes to how you're supposed to approach them, and solve the problems presented in them, be it through traversal, combat or navigation. If you choose this as your entry point, you'll probably find at least 3 or 4 missions you won't ever forget again. Some of them are iconic and would even be referenced by future games in the franchise. This is also where you'll first meet the legendary 9-Ball, everyone's favorite gatekeeper of 100% completion. Trust me, you'll know what I mean once you beat the game. Another standout feature of the OG is the fact you will miss some assignments through your playthrough, and that's deliberate. Throughout the campaign you'll be free to take jobs posted by the different companies involved in the plot, and depending on which you choose to accept, you'll directly influence your ties with said company and actively, voluntarily or involuntarily help them achieve their goals. This in turn means you are effectively skewing the power balance between corporations as you go through the missions, allowing you to experience multiple endings depending on who you chose to affiliate with the most.
So it has branching narrative paths? That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and you know what else is? The soundtrack. If you're into trance, acid and 90s techno, you are going to be adding some of these songs to your playlist for sure. And while it definitely is not my favorite OST, that title goes to another entry in our list. The fact it came out swinging with bangers like that back in '97 is pretty impressive. Now to be fair, it might sound like I'm painting this game as a perfect timeless classic, and that's exactly what I'm doing, but the game is by no means perfect, or even close to being the best the franchise has to offer. While the environments are great within the confines of its hardware limitations, draw distances can be quite short. It's obviously not up to par with anything we are used to even from 20 years ago, and it can be quite jarring to look at sometimes. Dialogue is comical at best, and while you might remember some decent one-liners from certain characters, you'll mostly be trying to contain your laugh while hearing some of these gems. The customization is great, but you have to keep in mind it's the literal first game. This is nowhere near as complex, engaging or detailed as future titles would end up being. The same could be said about the action portion of the game. Controlling your AC can be quite a labor of patience sometimes. Enemies, while varied, mostly pose no challenge outside rare instances, and AC on AC battles are not as much a highlight as they would come to be. Boss fights in general are not particularly well designed either, but they are memorable for certain.
Well, if that's the case, why won't newcomers choose to skip the first one and go straight to one of the first generation's expansions?
Damn Abby, an actually decent question. The short answer is, Project Phantasma is a prequel to AC1, and while narrative exposition is a bit tighter and more fleshed out, and missions are slightly more complex individually, it is less than half the content the original game has. Newcomers looking to get a fulfilling complete package would be left scratching their heads and itching for more. And sure, Master of Arena is undoubtedly the best game of first gen, but it's also significantly more complex than its predecessors, requiring a minimum prior understanding of the world, mechanics and rules of Armored Core. Not to mention it is also notably harder and would probably pose an even greater difficulty curve than 1. If you want to experience the roots, and have a solid perspective on how the series was first envisioned, even if just to compare it to games that would come to supersede it, go for the original Armored Core.
Alright, you almost convinced me, but let's hear about your other recommendations.
Do you have a moment to hear about our Lord and Savior, Armored Core 3? Imagine everything I described about the original Armored Core, but bigger, better, louder and faster. Not too fast, just faster. By skipping around 4 games after the first one, you'll arrive at one of the most cohesive and enjoyable entries. AC3 is built upon many experiments done over the years and numerous releases. It is first and foremost a universal reboot? Remake? Reimagining? I think the latter is the most accurate label. AC3 is a reimagining of the first title. It takes its concepts, overall story beats, conflicts, and locations, realizing them into their full potential. For the most part. Don't get the wrong idea though, while there are a lot of parallels, and direct inspirations from the first Armored Core, this is a whole new game. Dialogue this time around is actually pretty nice, the plot is a little less obtuse and melds better with the environmental storytelling. Graphics have received a very significant update, as expected, and sound effects are as iconic in this one as they are timeless. Gameplay-wise, it feels tight. The weird floatiness from Gen 2 is gone, and everything has this incredible weight and resistance to it. Enemies are smarter, although frankly still not very threatening. Mission objectives are a massive upgrade, especially considering you can choose to get assigned a whole different contract mid-sortie, and the soundtrack is less of an energetic party playlist, and more of a harrowing mishmash of classical music, choir vocals and some sort of futuristic rendition of EDM. Tonally it makes a lot of sense, and lends itself to some of the creepiest, most eerie, and goosebump-inducing soundscapes in the entire discography of AC. While a lot of part categories were introduced in Armored Core 2, most notably cores with additional features like overboost, it's not until Armored Core 3 where their potential would come to be explored further. It's here that we get access to Exceed Orbit cores, a fan favorite feature that would essentially allow you to weaponize your core part, turning it into an automated sentry turret. This is also the first game to feature ranged weapon choices for left arms, allowing for a considerably different approach to building your AC, something that would be expanded upon through its direct sequel. Also notable is the addition of the ability to hire consorts. These are other pilots just like you. Some are still operating clunky MTs, some are already fully fledged Ravens, and some make that transition as you allow them to accompany you into your sorties, by sacrificing a cut of your payout as fees for their help.
Okay, I get it. AC3 is basically a refinement of everything that came before, including AC1, so why would you even bother to go back and play that game?
Wow, you're really on fire today. It's true the third installment is a much more polished, feature-rich and complete experience than the first one, but it does have some significant drawbacks and changes that clearly distinguish it from the original. For better or worse, it does not incorporate the Human Plus mechanic in the same way. In this case it's delegated to an optional part called Op Intensify, rewarded after completing your first playthrough. By repeating specific missions and completing secret objectives you'll be able to access a lot of perks reminiscent of Human Plus, which again I won't spoil, but it's quite major gameplay wise. This way it serves less as a difficulty slider and more of a replayability tool. Some like this change, others not so much, it's just different. Secondly, credit management is way more lenient. At basically no point do you ever feel like you're struggling to keep up with costs or that you can't make any purchase you want. In fact, you can just engage in the arena mode and amass quite a bit of savings. Finally, and perhaps more notably, there are no real poster boys for AC3. In the first iteration, 9-ball was a prominent figure. It would stay around for the following titles in some capacity and be emblematic for those story arcs. This time around the main figure is faceless. While functionally similar to 9-ball, the controller is a less tangible force and more of a shadowy entity behind the scenes. There's also the possibility you might try AC1 first to later come back to AC3, and be able to appreciate the nods and references it makes.
You make an interesting proposal.
I know, right? I can't really talk about 3 without mentioning one of, if not the best expansion in the whole series, Silent Line. Silent Line is a direct sequel to 3 that tweaks existing game systems, balances out some quirks, and adds an absolutely incredible amount of parts to the garage. I might be a bit biased here, since Silent Line is my personal favorite game, but it just adds so much more value on top of an already amazing package that it had to be mentioned. You could say one could start by playing Silent Line and completely ignore 3, but that would be the same as eating a cake's toppings and leaving out the actual cake. These two come hand in hand. You should either just play 3 or play both in order. That being said, the same cannot be stated about the following troublesome duo.
Oh boy.
This is honestly a pretty tough call to make. The last entry point I would recommend is a bit hard to sell. Let's start by getting this out of the way. I think you should play Armored Core 4 before you play For Answer. Now hear me out before you leave and hire a raven to come hunt me down. For Answer is the superior game in every single aspect, and it's not even a contest. I think most people would share this opinion. FA has better missions, encounters, more part variety, better balancing and better everything.
So why should a newcomer play Armored Core 4?
It might sound silly, but it's actually rather simple. You shouldn't think of Armored Core 4 and For Answer as separate entities, rather they are the same package, but 4 is the prologue. Granted, it's not an amazing prologue, but it is one. I think to really get the most out of For Answer you need to go through 4 first for a couple of reasons. Primarily to get used to the mechanics. 4 marks the beginning of a completely fresh set of directives and goals for the series as a whole. 4th Gen does not play like any of the previous games, and it can be quite overwhelming, even when you don't have a past frame of reference to compare it to. I think 4's decidedly slower pace and more forgiving difficulty will serve well as a foundation to the sequel's explosive and frantic speed. Consider it sort of as the training wheels for Answer, where you get to experiment a bit with the new action paradigm and get to grips with what's expected from you as a pilot. Secondly comes the narrative. Both of these games function much better when you have the whole context of what's happening in the world and its big players stepping in the scene. Everything pretty much carries over, not unlike AC3 and Silent Line, but this time around on a much more personal level. This is also you can fully appreciate what you'll be put through in For Answer, elevating that one even more. Now with that out of the way, you should start with 4 indeed, but please do not leave it at that. I would strongly recommend you play through the 4th Gen entirely, just in this specific order so you don't have to downgrade severely if you do it in reverse. I mean, you can pretty much just speed through 4 anyway if you don't find it engaging. The game is not too long, so it should be doable.
Fair enough, but why 4th Gen and not any of the other games?
These 2 games probably appeal to a broader audience, more than any other title in the franchise. The twitch reflex-based action combat is arguably the most satisfying to master out of all the available options. The narrative is easier to follow. Supplice and White Glint, just by existing already make the whole thing absolutely kick-ass. Seriously, look at this shit. That AC is just something else. But this choice also comes from the fact Gen 5 is not really as single-player friendly, being much more focused on the multiplayer dynamic, which sadly can't really be recreated anymore. Armored Core Last Raven is considered by many the peak of the series, but that game is everything but a good entry point. If you start with it, you've either forfeited flesh for the greatness of steel, or you're going to have a rough, possibly not that enjoyable time. And honestly, while mechanically superior to 3 and SL, I don't think the vibe will click as much. Naturally, choosing 4 doesn't come just from excluding the other options. Set pieces are great, there is large-scale environmental destruction in some missions, making them pretty memorable, and combined with For Answer it has the best selection of music. Yeah, I said it. There are plenty of interesting mechanics to play around with. You can now equip basically any weapon to either side of your AC's arms, and you can fire back-mounted cannons without the need for specialized legs. Boosting is also completely different. There are several types of booster you can equip that allow you to maneuver your AC in unprecedented ways. Side boosting, back boosting, chain boosting, Trigger sensitivity gliding. Movement is really the highlight of Gen 4, and it all starts with Armored Core 4. The heat mechanic is now gone, but there are additional defensive parameters to look out for, such as primal armor, a recharging shield that covers your next. That's what ACs are called now, by the way, because they are so next level. Ha ha ha, laugh. It's a joke.
No one is laughing.
Primal armor, stabilizers that allow you to customize weight offset, because a balanced craft is better than an unbalanced one. Wouldn't want to fly an unstable mech breaking the sound barrier casually, right? Basically, there's a whole different set of stats to take in this time around, and they work differently enough to make a proper distinction from other entries. You can also kind of just completely ignore the garage for the most part. Not that you should, but you can. Some of the starting nexts can absolutely carry you through the entire game without needing much tuning, if any at all. Man, now that I think about it, AC4 is kind of fun still. But there are several glaring issues with it. Firstly, it's way too forgiving. I know I said being too unforgiving was a factor for not making it into these recommendations, but fuck, this one really is a bit too easy. For the record, there's a hard mode, but most people are better off not touching that until they are experienced in the game. The hard mode is, well, definitely hard, but the normal mode is too easy. The problem is there's no in between, in my opinion, and that can leave you feeling like some areas of the game are a bit of a slog to go through. Speaking of areas, this is brown, gray, white and silver. The game, holy shit, the color palette definitely is not for everyone on the presentation side. It gets better in 4 answer, but still, definitely not a positive. Lastly, build variety, while existent, is not nearly as interesting as it was previously, nor as it would end up being. It's a weird limbo to be in, frankly. Ultimately, for all it does well, Armored Core 4 can't help but be a transitory title, bridging the gap between old gen and this new, radically different behemoth 4 answer would turn out to be, and as such it's deserving of attention for all the points above. If you plan on trying 4th gen, give 4 a chance. Ravens, these are my subjective views on these games. Obviously everyone will have their own take on where people should start, and which games do what well. With AC6 around the corner, I think one of these choices would certainly help you keep yourself entertained and invested in these worlds. Hopefully you like what you try and become a fan. If not, I hope 6 is able to captivate you. That's going to be a wrap for the video. Thanks for the support as always. If you like my work and the content on this channel, please do leave a like and subscribe so I can graduate from Broke Raven to Chad Corporation CEO. Take care and stay boosted.